Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to Adrian's Digital Basement. On today's video, we're going to be revisiting the Dolch PAC62 Lunchbox computer. In a recent video, I worked on this machine and got it all fixed up so I could use this whenever I needed to have Windows 3.1 or 95 or XP quickly accessible to hook up to some legacy device. Unfortunately, when I tried to hook this thing up with Windows 3.1 to the Lucas Deco terminals, I realized the serial ports aren't working on here. So that's something I'm going to need to work on. But that's not what I want to focus on in this video. I want to focus on the screen. I want to get this screen upgraded so I can get much better video performance on the machine, but also have a bright and readable high-resolution LCD screen. So I've gone ahead and I ordered some parts from AliExpress. Yep, these are probably the last AliExpress things I'm going to be ordering in a while. And I want to see if I can upgrade this screen to something a little bit better. So without further ado, let's get right to it. So what doesn't come across in the camera is that the brightness of this screen is absolutely abysmal. The viewing angles aren't terrible considering the age of this screen. It is just 640 by 480, so just normal VGA resolution, and it uses a proprietary type digital interface to connect up to the video card that's installed into the ISA slot. Because it uses a proprietary interface, I can't upgrade that video card. That's actually a little bit of a problem. Even though that video card uses a standard chipset, I downloaded drivers for the card, just the generic chipset that is, and I tried to install high color drivers for Windows 3.1. They didn't work properly. I'm assuming there's some customized drivers that Dolch provided, and those would work, but I can't really get my hands on those. Not to mention I have no idea if those drivers are even compatible with Windows 95 or Windows XP or Windows 2000, any of those OSs, which I also want to try to get running on this machine. So even though this machine is running at like 260 megahertz, I think at this point, and has a PCI interface, I can't just put in a PCI video card because there's no way to get this screen hooked up to that card. Now, I do want to mention that a lot of people commented on the fact that you can order new cold cathode fluorescent tubes for these types of screens. You just have to take apart the screen and measure what's in there, and you can get replacements. And that probably would fix the brightness issue and potentially the yellow hue that this entire screen has, which people tell me comes from the failing or worn out CCFL tubes that are in there. That's probably the right thing to do if you're trying to keep this machine completely original. But I've obviously replaced parts in this thing like the entire motherboard, so originality is not what I want. I want functionality. And replacing the CCFL tubes are still going to limit me with the low resolution and that video card that I don't seem to have drivers for. So I'd rather just try to replace the entire screen itself. Now it goes without saying that any upgrade I do with this, it's contingent on the fact that the parts I've ordered actually work. So let me talk about what I have ordered. That is the controller for the new LCD panel, and it has VGA and a DVI input. VGA was extremely important to me because obviously we're going to be using this with an old video card that doesn't have a digital video interface, so we're going to need to use VGA most likely. And then these are the LCD panels I ordered. So we have some limitations in that the original screen is a little over 10 inches, I think 10.5, and it's 4x3. So we needed to order something that is roughly the same size, and I didn't want it to be any bigger because if it was bigger, it would be cut off around the edges, so it's had to be a bit smaller, which is actually what I've got here. So what I think this is an iPad screen from the iPad 3, which means that it is 4x3, but it's the Apple Retina resolution, which means that this is 2048 by 1536. I think that's the exact resolution. Now that resolution obviously is way too high for Windows 3.1, and if you did run it at that resolution, everything would be incredibly tiny on there. These screens are very, very high resolution and also really good quality LCDs with vibrant colors and incredible viewing angles that basically work from any angle. But the good thing is that you can run them at half resolution, which is 1024 by 768, which is a much more manageable resolution for old vintage computers like this. Now, what I don't 100% know is if this controller that should drive this screen directly has the ability to work with DOS resolutions over VGA. And what I mean by that is VGA, when you're running in MS-DOS, is typically running at a resolution of 720 by 400. And then when you're running in the very common VGA graphics mode, 320 by 200, you're actually running at, well, 640 by 400, but it's line doubled, and you're running at 70 hertz. So only when you're running at 640 by 480 or potentially 320 by 240, which is mode X at 60 hertz, is that kind of a more standard resolution. So I am slightly worried that this controller will work fine at 640 by 480 at 60 hertz, but if we try to use it at the 70 hertz modes, it might have a problem. I'm hoping that's not the case because I think the chip that's used on here is probably the same chip used on a lot of regular LCD displays. Like even though this has the right interface connector for this iPad screen, probably this was designed to work with all sorts of other displays as well. And the fact that it has a VGA connector makes me hope at least that this chip can handle those DOS resolutions properly. If it can't, we're unfortunately dead in the water. The card that's in the Dulce now has modified firmware that means that even in text mode, it's always running at 60 Hertz at 640 by 480. So it's actually scaling those lower resolutions up to that higher resolution. And that's because the panel that's in that thing is one fixed resolution. And back in the day, you didn't have chipsets like the one that's on here or the one that's on video cards that could do scaling in the GPU or in the chipset. And any kind of scaling that thing does is really ugly. It just does integer scaling, and you'll see these doubled lines and stuff like that. It's not very good looking. So I think that's one of the design considerations that Dulce took with that video card, just to run it all the time at that 60 Hertz refresh rate. So I think the very first thing to do is get this thing all hooked up together. I've never tested this stuff personally. Get it powered up. Hopefully it works. If not, I did buy 2 of them just in case. And then bust out the test bench with a regular VGA card, plug it into this thing, and let's just see what the video quality looks like. If it's good, then I need to see about trying to get this mounted inside the Dulce. Now what I have in this package is the front digitizer from the iPad. And the reason why I bought this is not because, we're going to make it work with a touchscreen. It's because this LCD panel is smaller than the opening that's on the bezel on the Dulce. And in order for us to not see the edges of the screen, I figured I could probably cut this cable off the front glass, and then we could sort of sandwich all of this together. And hopefully with this sandwich between the LCD and the front bezel, say the plastic comes to here, well, all we would see is this black strip around the edge, which should make it all look a little bit better. So looking at this little board, looks like we have a main Realtek IC. Hopefully that's a good thing. This Realtek IC probably just supports all the different resolutions. It obviously handles HDMI along with VGA. You might be wondering why there's a 3.5mm audio jack. That's because DVI does contain audio, which I think is extracted by this IC and output through the 3.5mm. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if there's also connections for speakers, probably some small amplification that's happening. This is a power regulation circuit. This takes some amount of voltage on the input. We're gonna have to look up what that is. It also has a front panel with some buttons. Hopefully we're never gonna need to access any of these buttons, but if for some reason we would, I could always drill some holes and extend some wires to some switches on the outside of the case, but I'm hoping that this stuff can just be set once and then forgotten about. This appears to be the connection that goes to the front panel itself. This appears to be the adapter board that the panel plugs into. I'm pretty sure the panel will plug in right here. Now I thought maybe I could do away with this cable and connect this directly to the board, but that is not the case. These are different connectors, and I'm assuming that all these different types of connections available on this board are for different panel types. Now this is the LCD panel itself, and that is the cable that will be connecting to this little adapter board. In case you're wondering, this is the information on the panel. It says it's an LG display panel. I have no idea if it really is or not, but I have to say I've seen some people who bought these before and they looked really, really great. I almost feel like these might have been removed from iPads that have been recycled, since I think iPad 3 is what this came out of, maybe iPad 3 and 4. Now, when you're shopping around for iPad screens, you're going to find that there are going to be some for later versions of iPads, like iPad Mini 3, I don't know, stuff like that, that I think are 10.5 inches, which is exactly the same size as the screen that's in the Dulce. The problem is, I think those connect up with a different type of connection than these boards support. And even though there may be boards you can use to drive those newer screens, they definitely do not have VGA. And I really, really wanted to have VGA on this computer so that I could plug the display directly into any of the older legacy video cards. It is a little overwhelming though when you're looking at these driver boards and the screens to figure out exactly which work with which. So to alleviate that problem, I ordered the driver board and the screen as a pair. That way I knew that these should work together. All right, so for connecting this up, looks like you flip up this little door here and this goes into there, but I'm pretty sure it needs to go in this way, like so. And then we flip down this little door clamp thing, like that. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use some of this tape, which I incidentally called Crapton. It's not because Kapton tape is bad, it's because this is fake and it's not that good. It doesn't stick that well. So I'm just gonna stick this down. And some of this fake Kapton you buy, on the inside of the roll, it'll say like Craxon and instead of Kapton, other things like that. So yeah, this is definitely fake Kapton. It's not good. And that's why I call it crapped on. All right, this is just temporary, just to hold this down so we can do testing, of course. For powering this up, I'm not quite sure what it needs to be powered on, so I have a 5-volt power supply, and then we have a 12-volt one. And yeah, I've taken to just writing on these, that way I don't have to sit there and try to study the tiny little font that's on them. I just write on them with a marker. Let's start with this 5-volt power supply and just see what happens. Got a power LED. Oh, hey, look at that. So it's like running in some kind of diagnostic test mode. Let's try powering it off and on. All right, no signal. Oh, excellent. So let's plug in an input source to see what this does. So we have the Pentium test bench out, and I have a random PCI video card, it's an ETI, something or other. It's obvious that we're going to be needing to connect this VGA connector to that VGA connector, and that's going to need to happen outside of the Dolch because there's no way to really hook this up internally. Even though some of these cards have an expansion header, that generally doesn't just have a standard VGA signal on them that you could then hook up to something internally. So what I went ahead and did is I also ordered a couple of these right angle VGA cables with the idea that I could have this poke through the back of the case through like one of the slot covers, and then it would be able to connect up to the VGA connector on the card. And I ordered one of each type of cable, one with the connector going up and one with the connector going down. And the good thing about this actually is if I want to unplug the internal screen and run something externally, I can still do that. This is not some kind of permanent connection with this screen to the video card. All right, here we go. Let's turn this on. Hopefully the computer's working. I don't remember if I left this on VGA or what. VGA? Oh no, it doesn't work. This was my fear. This was absolutely my fear. Oh, darn. Well, this might be a quick end to this video. That is a real disappointment. It's funny, you can bring up the menu now that we have an input signal, but it's all broken up. But I'm not thinking that there's anything that's broken here. Again, I feel that we have an input incompatibility issue with this particular video card. May as well just try a different card just for fun. But this is kind of interesting. This is actually what I was afraid of, that these things are just too new to support. Yeah, looks like it's the same problem. I think this white line as well, I don't think that's a fault. Again, I think that's due to the problem with the scan rate not being compatible. I think the best thing to do here is let's boot this thing up and see if we can get into Windows. Is this actually booted up? Yes. Let's see if 640 by 480 works. Yep, 640 by 480 works freaking fine. And look how good that looks. Unfreaking believable. And there's 640 by 480, so it definitely supports this low resolution. You could see that it was at 60 hertz. And I mean, and while it looks kind of soft, it still looks really good. So this is depressing that it doesn't work in DOS resolutions. I can't believe how gutted I feel right now just because this looks so good. Look at the viewing angles are great. It's so bright, it's so sharp. Oh dear. Now the interesting thing, the video card that's in the Dolch would actually work because it always runs, even in DOS mode, at 640 by 480 at 60 hertz. So pretty sure that this screen would work in text modes, but I really want to get away from using that video card. And unless there's a way to modify the BIOS or alter the BIOS on one of these more modern cards to stick with 640 by 480, even in text modes, pretty much dead in the water, at least with the controller that I currently have connected to this screen. Okay, so I think the next thing to do is to just test this screen with the Dolch video card because it has a VGA output on it. And let's see if it works with that in text mode. Okay, screen is powered up and it is connected to the Dolch computer. Let's turn on the Dolch, see if we get anything on the screen. I don't know if we have to like push a key combination to get external display. Oh wait, look. Yes, it works. It's kind of what I thought would be the case. And the fact that this is all weird looking, that's just part of that scaling stuff. Now it is off the edge, so hopefully there is a way to adjust the position, but I think there was. Very good. Well, that's something. That is something. Let's open the keyboard and try to get to the setup. There it is. So that obviously looks fantastic. And once I peel the plastic off, it'll look even better. So we have auto color adjust and auto image adjust. Oops, I think I haven't figured out how to use the menu buttons. There it is, auto adjust. Well, that did a good job, because now it's not cut off any longer on the edges. In case you're wondering if these are scrolling menus, they're not. It's just these 4 options: brightness, contrast, and black equalizer. I don't know if this, let's see, the brightness, does that control the backlight? It's hard to tell. Yes, that is the backlight control. Yeah, because you could see the pulse width modulation in the camera a little bit there. Oh, funny is the up button is actually down in the on-screen displays. So ridiculous. Now, I know you can't read that, but I can at an angle here just because the camera's being washed out. It says VGA 640 at 480 at 59.8 hertz, and it's running at 31.4 kilohertz, and the pixel clock is 25.1 megahertz. Okay, well, at least we have a working screen. I should probably run a few more tests just to see the different graphics modes, and let's see if they all work. Got to get the keyboard out. Also interesting is the internal screen is active right now while that one is, and I can just barely read this one. You can just see the backlights on compared to this screen. Okay, so we have this program called VidTest 4.5. This is pretty good because it allows you to output a whole bunch of different resolutions. I think under here we can do 350 line. So this is the EGA style. Oh, it's off the edge though. That means that I have to like access the buttons to fix that? Or is there an auto button? Menu, up, down, enter, and power. Oh no, this just does the video input. That's not useful. That one does brightness. Oh, that does volume. And menu. What if I hold down menu? Let's try holding one of these buttons down and see if that does anything. Oh, yes. Okay, holding down the enter button does the auto adjust. Whew. Okay, so that means I just have to have one button exposed on the back of this thing. Now, I guess the question is, if we exit this mode, is the text mode now messed up? I'm assuming it will be off center a little bit. Uh-oh. That was weird. I don't know why it was black screen. And yeah, it looks like it's shifted over a little bit. So that was 350 line, 400 line. That looks fine. And 480 line. That looks fine as well. Interesting. So it's really just the EGA mode that kind of messed up the alignment. So let me just try holding down that input button again. There we go. Oh, cut off the bottom. We were seeing the bottom a second ago, weren't we? Oh, that's lame. Oh, well, I mean, it's just 1 pixel on the bottom. It's not a big deal, but still kind of annoying. Interesting, because the menu had no manual control over any of that stuff. Let's power cycle the screen. Maybe it will auto adjust. I don't know. Nope, came back really quickly. Okay, let's try this mode again. I'm going to auto adjust this. This is 350 line. 400 line. Let's try auto adjust this. Who knows? Just okay. And 480. Oh, it's cut off. So lame. Okay, so here's Doom. Looking, yeah, frankly looks pretty incredible compared to the internal screen. It's like, it's really not any kind of comparison. I don't have a mouse hooked up, and this is all set up for a mouse. So all I can do is move around with WASD. I have no way to turn. Okay, well, whatever. It's looking pretty good, and that's what I really wanted to see. One last thing I want to try is Pinball Dreams, and this uses Mode X, which is 320 by 240. I just want to make sure that this works. You need a minimum of 530K free. Are you freaking kidding me? What do I have running here that's taking up all the space? Is it this buffers and files? Let's just get rid of these. Yeah, there we go. 563K free. Okay, so Mode X. Okay, yeah, working. This is good. And this shouldn't have any ugly scaling artifacts either, because this is 640 at 480 and this is 320 by 240, so it's just pixel doubled. Oh, you know what? It actually does look like it's scaling. See how ugly that is right there? I think I have this in a high res mode. Select resolution, high res. low res. I think that's the difference. I think it was running at like 320 by 480 or something weird like that. So now when we run this, the table won't be so squished. And yep, nice and smooth now. No issue. See, there's no weird scaling artifacts like we were seeing before. Okay, cool. And here's a random game that runs in text mode. And I don't know, seems fine. It's obviously off the edge of the screen a little bit, so need to hold this button down. Let's see if that fixes it. Yep, there we go. Now it's moved over. And here we are in Windows. And again, yes, it's going to require hitting this button every time switching between text mode and graphics mode. Pretty annoying, gotta say, pretty annoying. Well, let me think about what I have figured out here. So this screen works. It's not ideal, but it certainly does work, and it works better than this screen. Does it work better than the internal screen if I just switched out the CCFL tubes? I think so. The iPad screen is just so vibrant and has such good contrast, and this just has really terrible contrast ratio. And again, I feel that if I can get the video drivers for this card, then I can run this at a higher resolution. We could run at 1024 by 768 and it would look really sharp. And that's not something we'd ever be able to do with this internal screen. So I think what that means is I want to take the Dulce apart and I want to get the faceplate off, and let's look at how the original LCD that's in here is mounted and see if I can figure out a way to mount this thing. I have a feeling it's just going to be a bunch of tape, and that's how it's going to be held into this computer. All right, first step is to just get the back of the Dulce off. I took all the screws out. I don't think I need to disassemble anything inside the computer. Or maybe this needs to come off. I forgot how this is attached. I thought this is just held on by pressure. Yep, there we are. Probably the same on this side. This is the slot cover bracket thing. Now what needs to happen is these little covers have to come off on the handle, and they look like they're clipped on, I suppose. I'd like to try to get these off without marring the plastic too much. So we'll try using one of these spudgers. Wow, that is not working very well. How about if I use the spudger to protect the plastic? All right, there we go. So with that popped open, it reveals two screws. Oh, there we go. Now I think that means that the front panel is now kind of loose, and the screen is attached to the chassis, not the front panel, not the black plastic that is. So this should slide off, although maybe I need to take these feet off. Well, the back ones are definitely attached to the plastic. These ones, I'm not so sure. Oh yeah, that went into the chassis. Okay, so you gotta take these feet off. Yeah, those just go into the plastic. These two you gotta take off because they go into the metal. Oh, look at that. Okay, so the whole front's coming off now, and yep, the screen is getting left behind. Now we do have some cables for the power LED and whatnot. I'm trying to figure out all the details here, but there's a little circuit board there that has a couple buttons and a speaker, and some extra cables. Actually, one of those looks like the backlight control for the LCD. See how the wires connect up to the LCD? As for the two LEDs on the front bezel, there's wires, you can't see them right now, that run into the chassis, to the motherboard, I suppose. And it doesn't look like I can disconnect them from this side, so I'm gonna have to go fish those out and unplug them from the motherboard. There are the two cables. So this other one is this red wire, which I'll just pull through. That was the power LED, I think. And there's the green one. The front panel should be free. And there's the Dulce laid bare. So indeed, that's the backlight driver there. So this thing has a cold cathode tube that runs along the top edge. Now looking at the construction of this screen, looks like there's a plastic bezel that's actually glued onto the LCD, and then there's this metal scaffolding that holds everything up and together. And over on the left, we can see the panel interface, probably the power cable for it, and these ribbon cables that go to that video card, the special video card that then connects probably with a flat flex to the back of this panel. And this is that bezel that's glued on. So I'm just going to carefully peel this off. Don't want to fold it too tightly or permanently crease it. It's sort of a thick, sort of a plastic cardstock kind of material. All right, so the panel itself seems to have these 4 fasteners. So I'll just loosen these first. All right, there we have it. There is the Dolch screen. LQ10D321, made in Japan. As I mentioned, along the top edge is the cold cathode fluorescent light. So it runs along the top. In order to get that out, I think you'd have to take apart the screen entirely. So all of these metal bands that run around the edge would need to come off, and that would expose the lamp. Now, part of the issue is this scaffolding that's left behind on the chassis holds this at the exact right position away from the body so that the front bezel lines up correctly. Well, obviously the new LCD, we don't have the ability to do that because it's quite a lot smaller. Okay, so I think what I need to do at this point is roughly mount the original screen onto the chassis, and I'm going to do these mods, by the way, in a way that doesn't modify or ruin anything. So this could go back with the original screen at any time. Anyhow, I'm going to remount the screen, and I'm going to measure the depth from the chassis to the front of the screen. In fact, I'll place the little plastic bezel on there as well, and then I can measure the actual depth. And that way I can come up with a way to mount the iPad screen with the correct amount of depth so that there isn't a gap between the front bezel when we put it back on and the iPad screen itself. All right, there it is. The hard part is done. Now, this is not mounted in there, it's just sitting in there. I was just basically doing a test fit, but I think this looks pretty good. Of course, all those plastic layers are still over the glass and the LCD screen, which is why it looks so hazy. So I decided to 3D print something to hold the screen. And let's just remove the digitizer glass and the LCD, which is just sitting in place. So it turns out when the original LCD was mounted in the correct scaffolding with that plastic bezel installed, it was about 22.5 millimeters from the chassis to the top side of the screen. And actually, I measured from the plastic bezel when it was installed. So I ended up modifying the design of an iPad LCD holder that someone else created. It was basically an external case for this LCD module. What I reused from that design, if we pop the screen off, were the mounting locations for the screws for the actual LCD. The rest of this I just worked up to lift the screen off the chassis, add some mounting locations, I added some tabs here, which I could either affix with some screws or maybe glue. Plus I added some notches for cables to run through, because my idea will be that the converter board is going to sit underneath here, probably double stick taped right onto the chassis, and the VGA cable will need to run outside of this, plus the little button panel, things like that. Now when we look at the scaffolding, I added a couple lines here and there just to kind of show the alignment of the original screen. This would just sit on the chassis around that location, and obviously I would just need to affix this somehow, but I found actually when I put the top cover on, it actually kind of squishes this down, holds it mostly in place. So I think just some hot glue around the edges, especially around these holes that are visible on the chassis, which will kind of give the glue something to grip onto, will pretty much hold this in place. Now, I am very far from a good engineer when it comes to 3D modeling and building things. The way I always work is by feel and by looking at things, and when you need precision for mounting an LCD like this, it's just not something I have. So in a way, I'm kind of lucky that the screen is smaller than the original, which gives me some leeway for getting it centered in the opening on the front cover. I was super grateful that someone else had done the hard work of figuring out the little mounting holes and standoffs to hold this screen, because that would have taken me a lot longer than reusing one of those designs. So I'm going to upload this adapter, not that I think anyone's going to want to use this, to Thingiverse, and I will of course link to the original design that this was remixed from. The hard part for me is over with, and that was making and designing this bracket. Next, I'm going to just spend some time to figure out where everything's going to go and figure out how to get everything mounted to the case, and then I'll be back to explain exactly what I did. And here is what I've come up with. So the iPad screen is currently mounted to that 3D printed bracket, and I have that controller board, the VGA HDMI controller board, behind the screen. I can remove the screen because it's just got screws holding it on, so if I need access to that board, I can get to it. This is the VGA cable that comes out of the control board. It's mounted about right here under the screen, and it makes its way over to where the cards are. This flat ribbon cable goes over to the buttons, which I have mounted on the other side, and this yellow and black wire is the power cable, 12 volts. I realized on the back of the controller, it actually says 12 volts and ground. So I was giving it 5 volts originally, it runs on 12, even though it doesn't seem to make any difference whatsoever. Now if we turn on the computer, I did this last night, so it should still be working, fingers crossed. Yep, there we go, comes right up. You don't even have to try to power on the display module. It sort of remembers the last state that it was in. And here's the monitor displaying a test pattern from the program VidTest, and well, it looks basically perfect. It looks awesome. Super bright, super vibrant. I mean, it's an iPad screen. If you ever used an iPad, you kind of know how those LCD screens work. They look good. Now you'll notice on the front of the machine there's a little PCB with 2 buttons on it. Originally this was to control the brightness of the backlight on the original screen, although both of these never seem to really do anything. I'm not sure why. There was essentially a cable that came out of this and went into the backlight driver, which is now all disconnected by the way, and then this drove the actual backlight tube on the original panel. So I've repurposed this button that if I hold it down, it's actually the same thing as the auto adjust, because we know we're going to need to do that auto adjust periodically. Then that means I won't have to go to the backside to hit the little buttons, which I'll show you in a second, that control the overall screen. Now, they're actually on the inside of the case anyway, so if this thing were all buttoned up, I wouldn't be able to get to those buttons. I'm noticing, oddly enough, after doing that auto adjustment, the 640 by 480 now has that bottom line visible. One issue, and this is obviously a symptom of the video card, is that text mode, after you've auto-adjusted for the graphics 640 by 480, results in the edge of the text mode being chopped off on the right side. There should be a scroll bar or at least a line on that side. If we hold down the auto button, that should reveal the scroll bar. There it is. And that means if we go into Microsoft Windows, because I don't have any drivers for high resolution, it looks like it's chopped off a little bit on the left side. So again, I have to hold down the auto button to get that to center properly. And this is probably the biggest negative with using this screen with this video card on this machine right now. You'll notice like before, Windows 3.1 looks great. We're at 6500 Kelvin white point, so that looks way better than that yellowish mess that it was before. And of course the contrast ratio looks great too. So at night, the blacks are very, very dark. I mean, it's still an LCD, so it's not OLED, but it still looks so much better than the old screen. Rotating the computer around, things pretty much look normal back here, except on the edge of the drive cage, this is the button panel for the monitor. So if I need to access it, it's right there. I did decide to solder the connections for the enter button, which is the auto adjust for the image, right onto the button. So if for some reason I want to connect up one of these other buttons to that front panel, because there are 2 buttons on it, I can do so. I just need to run 1 extra wire, because one of these is ground and one of them is the signal. The resistors for these buttons is actually on the main controller board and it's not on this little panel. So for instance, if I wanted to hook up the power button to that front panel so I could just turn off the screen while the machine was busy doing something, I could easily just do that. As a side note, I did figure out what was wrong with the serial ports on this thing, and I have actually rewired them so that they work now. I always knew that there had to have been 2 different standards for the way these were wired between different motherboards of this time period, and I found a very helpful article, which of course I'll link in the description below, about how the wiring differs between these 2 motherboard standards. So I just rewired these using the standard that this motherboard uses, and well, now they work perfectly. Otherwise, what's happening inside this case is pretty much what you saw in the last video on the Dulch. I haven't really changed anything. I still have the Sound Blaster 32 with the expanded memory in there. There's the video card. I have a compact flash adapter, PS2 port, and 2 USB ports. Now, there happened to have been a hole on the header for the USB ports for, I think, a FireWire port. So I used the nibbler to cut a little slot into the bracket, and now the VGA cable routes through there, and it's connected up to the video card through that right angle connector. Funny thing is, if I ever want to use this LCD panel as an external VGA monitor, I can, since all I have to do is just disconnect this and plug it into something else. There's a little bit of extra length here, or I could use an extension cable. So all that's really left to do is figure out how to get this piece of glass mounted on here just to hide the ugly edges of the LCD panel. And I was giving this some thought this morning while I was having my morning coffee, and I thought maybe the right thing to do would be to actually try to attach it to the inside of this front bezel. There's a flat surface on the right, left, and top edge of the case. So if I put some double-sided adhesive on 3 sides, what I think I could do is lay the Dulch on its back, get this positioned exactly right over the LCD, because you do have to have it correct, because there isn't a lot of room when it comes to tolerances for positioning this so you don't cut off any of the LCD. So if I have this aligned and it's just resting on the LCD, if I then slide the front cover over the top with that adhesive stuck on here, then hopefully the iPad glass should adhere to that adhesive, and that way when I lift the front away, the glass should still stay behind and then be in the correct position. And then I could add some more tape or hot glue or whatever to keep the glass in place, and that way it's just always in the right spot. And the reason why I don't just attach it on top of the LCD is because if I ever need to get to that controller board, I need to remove the screws from the LCD, and if this is glued on top, And that just seems like a problem. I might break the glass, for instance, trying to get it off. And yeah, I think so. Having this stuck onto the front of the Dulce seems like the smarter choice. That actually worked. I ended up using this very thin double stick adhesive stuff. I think this is actually designed for holding on bezels and things like that. I bought this years ago when I did a LCD swap in an old ThinkPad. Gosh, that was so long ago. But I put thin strips of this just around the edges, put the glass on top of the LCD with the whole computer on its back, and then gently lowered the front bezel on top of it and pushed it down, and then when I pulled the bezel away, the glass was attached. The other thing about this particular situation is that there is quite a tight sandwich of the LCD, the holder that's behind it, and the glass. So just having the front cover screwed on is actually pushing it all together. So there's pretty much no chance that this is ever gonna come loose. But the cool thing is this has glass over the LCD, which means, look, when I tap on it, it doesn't actually affect the LCD, which I peeled off those plastic layers, is pretty delicate at this point, and you could easily scratch it. But now there's glass on here, which means it's easy to clean and much more durable. Now, one issue I noticed when I have this thing all back together with the bezel on here is that the LCD and the entire bracket that holds it is slightly rotated clockwise, just ever so slightly. The gap over here is a little bit less than the gap on this side. Luckily, I'm not that much of a perfectionist and I don't really care. So this is totally fine for me. And I have to say, this looks awesome. And I guess the only negative of this particular setup is that this glass doesn't look like it has any anti-reflective oleophobic type coatings on it. Therefore, it is kind of reflective. But I definitely feel that it was a worthwhile trade-off from this original LCD panel, because the new one, it just looks so good compared to the original. Now let's try running a game. Let's just see how this looks. I think it's gonna look pretty darn good. Yes, we have Nuke 3D. Performance is not great, considering this machine at 240 megahertz is plenty fast to run this game at, full speed, 30 frames per second or 35 or whatever it normally runs at. But the problem is, of course, this video card. It's pretty pokey. Yeah, this looks freaking awesome. And I'm sitting off to the side because the camera is where I would normally sit, and it still looks really good. iPads have excellent viewing angles, and while it gets a little dimmer off axis, if you were using this thing in a setting where there were multiple people looking at the screen, different people at different angles would only have to contend with some of the glare issues. But luckily there's a lot of brightness on the screen, although it's not nearly as bright as a more modern iPad screen. It still looks really, really good. So I've been spending some time trying to get video drivers working for Windows 3.1. And the video card that's in this computer happens to be a Chipson Technology 65545, which should be a 2D graphics accelerator. I found a few drivers for this card, including this one on archive.org. There's another one on Vogons, but unfortunately they don't seem to work. So I'm just running in VGA mode, and if we run the setup utility, the Windows setup utility, this does appear to bring up this control panel where it allows us to do various things, and some of this works. Like right now it's displaying what we see on Windows on both the internal LCD, which is gone, that was the one I removed, and the external CRT, which is the VGA connector. And if we push the CRT button, it does work. And look at this. If we run a command prompt, text mode is now unreadable because it's probably running at 70 Hertz. Of course, we can Alt-Tab to bring this into a window, and that works. But if we go back to both, and now we run the command prompt again, it's fine, since it's doing that 640 by 480 functionality required for that internal screen, which is not there. I unplugged it, of course. So that works. But if I pick any of these graphics modes, which should be GUI accelerated, so even 640 by 480 at 16 colors, and we hit OK, this will actually select the driver, and this is what we get. So mouse pointer is working, but the rest of the screen is just messed up. And oddly enough, we don't even see any of the GUI elements, which I'm assuming are because it's trying to draw them using the accelerator functionality, which doesn't seem to work. And yep, that's all we get. Now let's see, can I actually exit out of this? Alt FX? I don't know, it doesn't seem to even be responding to keyboard commands, so I'll just have to exit out. Now obviously it's still running in both mode, that way we see the text correctly. But I've tried both of the drivers, all these different resolutions, and none of them work properly with this particular card. So what can I say about this upgrade? Do I recommend you do this if you have a PAX 62 like I do? Oh, it's hard to say. I really, really wish the controller in here supported DOS text modes, because if it did, I'd be rocking a really fast PCI video card, or even I'm planning to upgrade this to a Super Socket 7 with an AGP slot. I could have put a TNT2 in here and really had great DOS performance. But clearly that's not in the cards because of that controller board just not supporting those DOS modes. The worst thing is, I'm positive that that chip, that Realtek chip that's on that board that's driving this LCD can support DOS modes. It's just the firmware that they put on that card just never considered those DOS resolutions. And it's quite possible there are other versions of this little adapter board that are out there that do support DOS resolutions. So if you have one of these iPad 3 screens hooked up to a little driver board that has VGA just like this one, but the menus look different, so it's running different firmware, can you go test yours to see if it actually supports those DOS text modes? Perhaps the solution to my problem is simply finding a controller that has VGA and can drive this iPad 3 screen and supports those modes, and then we could just do away with this entire problem I'm having. Either way, I still think this is a worthwhile upgrade just because looking at Duke 3D running here, it looks so good, and I just don't think it would ever have looked that good on the original screen. And I'm still super bummed out that I can't even run Windows at the high resolutions, which clearly this screen would support, but I can't find a working driver. If you know where I could get drivers for this thing that could actually drive the screen at high resolution and work properly in Windows 3.1, definitely please let me know. But as I said, I tried out the drivers on Vogons and on archive.org, and neither of those work. Another solution I was just thinking about is, what if a PCI video card with DVI could actually drive this properly in DOS text modes? It's possible with a DVI to HDMI cable, maybe the controller would tell the PCI video card, hey, I don't support those DOS text modes, give me graphics mode that I can support. So the video card would say upscale it to a resolution that this does support. I luckily bought a spare LCD and a spare controller so I can test that stuff outside of this machine to try to figure out a combination that maybe does work. Problem is, I might have just one PCI video card that has DVI, and even with that, I have no idea if that card is any good in working in DOS, like if there are Windows 3.1 drivers, or if that card was really designed for a much later system as a secondary video card for use with like Windows XP, for instance. So I'm really looking for input on potential solutions to this particular problem with this resolution in DOS, or maybe there's a way to modify firmware of another PCI video card that would allow it to output 640x480 over the VGA connector and not have to worry about those weird DOS resolutions that this doesn't support. So I think that's going to be it for this video. This project was a lot more work than I thought it was, and I'm really sad that the payoff really wasn't there. I was expecting to have high performance video with high resolutions, and that just didn't work out. So you win some and you lose some, but at least I have a more vibrant screen now with better color, better brightness, better viewing angles, better contrast, better all those things than I would have had before. So if you enjoyed this video, thumbs up. If you thought I completely ruined this machine, then you know what to do. Of course, I can totally revert it back to original. I didn't damage anything in this modification process, but if you'd like to try to do this mod yourself, I will upload the STL file to Thingiverse. There'll be a link in the description below, and thanks to the original person who created this design, so I was able to adapt theirs to make this adapter. Comment down below with any other thoughts on this process, subscribe, the usual YouTube junk, and huge thanks to my supporters. Their names are on the side of the screen. They make it possible I do this full time. Without them, I wouldn't be able to do this. I'd have to get a job. So you can become a supporter. The link's down below. You get early access to videos and other cool behind the scenes stuff. And that is gonna be that. So thanks very much for watching. Stay healthy, stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.